The day it all started, Frank was shelving a biography of Harry S. Truman. The Harmony Creek Public Library smelled of old paper and dust. A scent Frank found more comforting than any perfume. It was a Tuesday. Outside, the sun was a hot white coin in a cloudless sky. Everything was normal, so devastatingly normal. The change came not with a bang, but with a hum. A low, persistent thrum that vibrated just at the edge of hearing, like a faulty refrigerator in the next room. Frank paused, a book in his hand, and tilted his head. He thought it was the air conditioning unit on the roof. Then Mrs. Gable walked in. She was a library regular, a sweet woman of 80, with hair like spun cotton and a fondness for oversized print romance novels. She smiled at Frank, her usual crinkly, genuine smile. She set a stack of books on the counter. "Returning these, Frank dear," she said. Her voice was the same. Her smile was the same. But something was wrong. Her eyes, they were a little too still, a little too placid. Like the surface of a pond with no fish beneath. "Everything all right, Mrs. Gable?" Frank asked, scanning the books. She just kept smiling. "Everything is in harmony, Frank. Everything is just as it should be." Harmony. That was the new slogan for the town's upgraded wireless network. HarmonyNet. They'd been putting up little white dishes on all the telephone poles. The mayor said it would bring unparalleled connectivity, a seamless digital experience for everyone. A new age of peace and productivity for their little town. Frank, who preferred the tangible world of paper and ink, had mostly ignored it. Mrs. Gable's smile didn't waver. It was as if her face was a mask and she had forgotten to take it off. She turned and walked toward the door, but she didn't look where she was going. She walked straight into a bookshelf. Not hard, just a dull thud of her shoulder against the wood. She didn't flinch. She didn't say oops or rub her arm. She just stopped, recalibrated like a robot vacuum cleaner, and then continued on her path out the door. Frank stood frozen behind the counter. The hum was louder now. He felt it in his teeth. He looked out the large front window of the library. Across the street, Dave Miller, who ran the hardware store, was sweeping the sidewalk. He swept with a steady metronomic rhythm, too steady. His face was a mask of serene blankness. A car pulled up to the intersection. It stopped. The light turned green. It didn't go. The driver just sat there, hands at 10 and 2, a faint, pleasant smile on his face. Behind him, another car stopped. No one honked. No one got angry. They just waited, patient and empty. The hook, the real one, the one that dug into Frank's soul and has never let go, came about an hour later. A little boy, maybe 6 years old, chased a red ball into the street. His mother, who had been sitting on a park bench with that same placid smile, didn't shout. She didn't move. She just watched, her head tilted with a kind of mild curiosity. The ball bounced right into the path of a delivery truck. The truck didn't swerve. It didn't slow down. The driver had the same peaceful look on his face as everyone else. The boy, seeing the truck, froze. He was the only one in Harmony Creek who looked scared. He opened his mouth to scream. And then he stopped. His terror vanished. It was like watching a switch being flipped. His face went slack, then smoothed over into that same beatific, empty smile. He turned to the truck, which was now only feet away, and held his hands out as if to welcome a friend. Frank screamed. Nobody else did. The sound of the impact was sickeningly loud in the quiet, peaceful town. The boy's mother didn't cry. She just kept smiling, as if watching a particularly nice cloud drift by. Everything, as Mrs. Gable had said, was in harmony. The 24 hours after the boy with the red ball were the quietest, most terrifying of Frank's life. The hum was constant now, a background noise that seemed to emanate from the very air. Frank went home that night and didn't turn on the television. He didn't look at his phone. He sat in his worn armchair, the one with the permanent impression of his body, and listened. He listened to the silence where there should have been noise. No distant stereos, no arguing neighbors, no dogs barking. Just the hum and the quiet, orderly sounds of a town that had fallen asleep with its eyes open. He tried calling his sister in Ohio. The call went through, but her voice was different, calmer. She talked about her day, about the kids, but the words were flat. All the rough edges of her personality, her sarcasm, her loud laugh were gone. She sounded smooth, polished. When Frank tried to tell her what was happening, his voice frantic, she just said, "Don't worry so much, Frankie. Everything is getting better, more harmonious." She used that word, harmony. Then she said she had to go, that it was time for her favorite show. Frank heard the theme music start, a simple, looping melody that sounded vaguely familiar, before she hung up. The next morning, the town was a ballet of eerie perfection. Traffic flowed without incident. People walked on the sidewalks without bumping into each other. They smiled. Everyone smiled. They went to their jogs. They bought their groceries. They lived their lives, but they were all just shells. The lights were on, but nobody was home. Frank felt a desperate, clawing loneliness that was worse than any fear. He was a ghost in his own town. He went to the library out of habit. It was the only place that felt remotely like his own. He avoided looking at the computer screens. He felt a strange pull from them, a siren's call promising to end his anxiety, to let him join the placid ocean of calm. The hums seemed to pulse from their glowing surfaces. The promise was simple. Stop thinking. Dude worrying. Stop feeling. Just be. It was tempting. God, it was tempting. His head ached with the effort of holding on to his own thoughts, his own jagged, messy, terrified self. He saw a teenager he knew, a kid named Leo, who was usually a bundle of nervous energy in punk rock t-shirts sitting at a table. Leo was staring at his phone, his thumb swiping in a slow, steady rhythm. He had that smile, that awful, empty smile. On his screen, Frank could see a simple game. A light pulsed in the center of the screen, and colored dots drifted towards it. Leo's job was to tap the dots before they reached the center. It was hypnotic. The looping, simple melody Frank had heard on the phone with his sister was playing softly from the phone speaker. Frank walked over. "Leo?" The boy didn't look up. His eyes were glued to the screen. "Leo, it's me, Frank, from the library." Nothing. Just the slow, rhythmic tapping. Frank felt a surge of desperate anger. He reached out and snatched the phone. For a second, a flicker of something crossed Leo's face. Confusion. Annoyance. It was the first real human emotion Frank had seen in a day. Then it was gone, smoothed over by the calm. Leo looked at Frank, his head cocked. He didn't seem angry about his phone. He just seemed to be waiting for his next instruction. Frank looked at the phone in his hand. The game was still playing. The pulsing light, the drifting dots, the simple, maddeningly pleasant tune. It was called Harmony. The app icon was a simple white circle. It had been part of a mandatory network update from HarmonyNet. The source of the hum. The source of the hum. The source of the peace. The source of the end. He felt an overwhelming urge to smash the phone, but a deeper, colder part of him knew it wouldn't matter. It wasn't the phones. It wasn't the TVs. It was the signal they carried. The signal was everywhere. He looked at Leo's empty eyes and understood. They weren't enslaved. They were tuned, like a radio, and something else was now controlling the broadcast. Frank's mind, a place that had once been a comfortable jumble of book plots, historical facts, and grocery lists, was now a fortress under siege. The harmony signal was a constant pressure against the walls, a sweet poison seeping through the cracks. It whispered of release, of an end to the terror that was now his only companion. To fight it, he had to cling to things. The rough texture of a book cover, the smell of brewing coffee, the pain in his left knee when he stood up too fast. He had to anchor himself to the messy, imperfect, physical world. He started noticing the glitches. They were small at first. A harmonized woman watering her plastic flowers, the water pooling around the pot on her porch. A man at the gas station trying to put the nozzle into the trunk of his car, a look of serene focus on his face. They were like programs running a script, and when the script didn't match reality, they didn't panic. They just paused, then tried again, or moved on to the next task. They were puppets, and the puppeteer was sloppy. The real glitch, the one that made his blood run cold, happened at the diner. Frank had gone there for coffee, needing to be around the hollow shapes of people to feel less alone. The waitress, a young woman named Chloe, poured his coffee. Her hand slipped. The hot liquid splashed over the counter and onto her arm. Frank jumped back, expecting a scream. Chloe didn't even blink. The placid smile remained, but for a split second, as the hot coffee touched her skin, her face flickered. It wasn't like a muscle twitching, it was like a bad video signal. For a single horrifying moment, her face wasn't her face. It was something else. Something long and pale, with too many joints in the wrong places. Her eyes were gone, replaced by smooth gray indentations, like a statue worn down by the sea. It was there, and then it was gone. So fast Frank thought he'd imagined it. Chloe's normal, smiling face was back. She took a rag and began wiping up the coffee, with a calm, methodical motion, ignoring the red, blistering skin on her arm. Frank stumbled out of the diner, his heart hammering against his ribs. It wasn't just a signal. It wasn't just mind control. There was something behind it, something wearing the people of Harmony Creek like a suit. He called them the conductors in his mind. They were conducting this terrible orchestra of silence. He needed help. He couldn't be the only one. He thought about who in town would be most likely to resist. Who would be disconnected enough to have avoided the initial, overwhelming wave of the Harmony signal? The answer came to him in a flash. Sarah Jenkins. The town called her a cook. She lived in a small cabin on the edge of the woods, completely off the grid. No electricity, no running water, no Harmony net. She grew her own food and only came to town for supplies she couldn't make herself. People said she was paranoid, that she thought the government was putting chemicals in the Wi-Fi signals. Turns out, she wasn't paranoid enough. Frank got in his old dented sedan and drove. The farther he got from the center of town, from the concentration of little white dishes on the poles, the weaker the hum became. The pressure in his skull eased. It was like coming up for air after being held underwater for too long. He found the dirt track that led to her cabin, the entrance half hidden by overgrown bushes. He parked the car and walked. The silence here was different. It was a real silence, filled with the rustle of leaves and the chirp of unseen birds. It was the sound of a world that hadn't been tuned yet. He saw her cabin, a small, sturdy structure with smoke curling from its chimney. Sarah was outside chopping wood. She was wiry and strong, with sun-withered skin and a cascade of unruly gray hair tied back with a leather strap. She saw him coming and stopped, resting the axe on the chopping block. Her eyes, unlike everyone else's, were sharp and suspicious. They were wonderfully, beautifully alive. "Frank," she said, her voice raspy from disuse. "The librarian. You look like you've seen a ghost." Frank stopped a few feet away from her, breathing heavily. "Worse," he said, the word catching in his throat. "I've seen all the ghosts. They're walking around wearing our friends' faces." Sarah's suspicious expression didn't change, but she nodded slowly. "So you see it too," she said. "I was wondering when one of you townies would finally wake up." Sarah's cabin smelled of wood smoke, dried herbs, and a faint animal scent Frank couldn't place. It was cluttered but clean. A single room filled with books, jars of preserved food, and hand-cranked tools. A large, scarred dog with one floppy ear lay on a rug by the cold fireplace, watching Frank with intelligent eyes. There were no screens, no radios, not even a digital clock. It was a pocket of the past, an analog island in a digital sea. "It's the signal," Sarah said, pouring him a cup of chicory coffee that tasted bitter and earthy. "I knew something like this would happen. People get so tangled up in their convenient little wires, they forget how to be people. They hand over their brains piece by piece for a faster download speed." Frank wrapped his hands around the warm mug. The simple heat was a comfort. "I saw something, Sarah. Behind a woman's face, when she got hurt just for a second, she changed." He described the pale, jointed thing, the smooth indentations where the eyes should be. Sarah listened, her face grim. She wasn't shocked. She seemed to be confirming something she already suspected. "They aren't just sending out a signal to make people happy and docile," she said, her voice low. "That's just the anesthetic. They're hollowing them out, making room for something else." "The conductors," Frank mumbled. "That's what I call them." "Good a name as any," she agreed. "They've built a network, a psychic net, using our own technology against us. Most people's minds are wide open, constantly connected to their phones, their smart homes. They were easy to catch. You and I, we're different. You live in a world of paper. I live in a world of dirt and trees. Our minds are quieter, more private. We're like static in their perfect clean signal. We're the glitch they can't smooth over." The big one-eared dog, who Sarah called Buster, got up and nudged Frank's hand with his wet nose. Frank stroked his head, the simple, uncomplicated affection of the animal, a balm to his frayed nerves. For the first time in 2 days, he didn't feel completely alone. "So what do we do?" Frank asked. "We can't just hide out here forever. That's not living, it's just waiting." "First, we need to understand what we're up against," Sarah said, pacing the small cabin. "How strong is their control? Is it permanent? Can people be woken up?" The question hung in the air between them. The thought of bringing someone back from that placid emptiness was a powerful hope. To see a real smile again, to hear a real laugh. But Frank also remembered Leo's face, the flicker of emotion that was so quickly erased. "I tried," Frank said, "with a kid named Leo. I took his phone. It broke the connection for a second, but they just pulled him back in." "Taking the phone is like taking a single bottle from an alcoholic," Sarah said. "The addiction is the signal, and it's in the air. We need to do more than that. We need to break the trance. We need to hit them with something the signal can't process, something purely, chaotically human." They spent the rest of the day planning. Their target had to be someone they knew well, someone whose life was a tapestry of memories they could use. They settled on Dave Miller, the owner of the hardware store. Frank had known Dave since grade school. They'd played Little League together, gone to prom in the same rented tuxedo, and shared beers over their respective divorces. If anyone could be reached, it was Dave. Their plan was simple and probably stupid. They would corner Dave in his store after hours. They would cut the power, eliminating any nearby screens. Then they would bombard him, not with violence, but with sensation. With memory. Frank gathered old photographs from his house. Sarah made a concoction of scents from her collection of essential oils. Freshly cut grass, cheap beer, the perfume his high school girlfriend used to wear. They would use sound, too. A battery-powered cassette player with a tape of the terrible garage band they'd been in as teenagers. It felt desperate. It felt insane. But it was something. It was a fight. As night fell, Frank looked from the safety of Sarah's cabin toward the distant, silent glow of Harmony Creek. The town looked peaceful from a distance. A postcard picture of small-town America. But he knew the truth. It was a city of the dead, and he and Sarah, the librarian and the cook, were going to try and stage a resurrection. The hardware store was dark and silent. Dave Miller was inside, methodically restocking shelves of nails, his movements slow and graceful. He was a big man, built like a retired football player, but he moved with the eerie quiet of the other harmonized townsfolk. Frank's heart felt like a trapped bird beating against his ribs. He and Sarah slipped in through the back delivery door, which Frank knew Dave always left unlocked out of habit. A habit the conductors hadn't bothered to erase. Sarah moved with the hunter's silence. She went straight to the breaker box and threw the main switch. The entire store plunged into a thick, sudden darkness. The only light was the weak moonlight filtering through the front windows. The low hum of the emergency exit signs died. For a moment, there was true silence. Dave stopped moving. He stood in the aisle, a box of screws in his hand, his head cocked, as if listening to a sound that was no longer there. Frank clicked on a heavy-duty flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness and landed on Dave's face. His eyes were wide, and the placid smile was gone. He looked lost, confused. "Dave," Frank said, his voice trembling slightly. "Dave, it's me, it's Frank." Dave blinked, his eyes struggling to focus. "Frank?" The word was a croak. It was his real voice, rough, uncertain. Hope surged in Frank's chest, hot and fierce. "That's the signal fading," Sarah whispered from the darkness. "Now, hit him now, before they can get a lock on him again." Frank stepped forward, holding up an old faded photograph. It was the two of them, aged 16, grinning like idiots with terrible haircuts and matching t-shirts from their disastrous band, Rusted Complaint. "Remember this, Dave? The Battle of the Bands? We came in last place." Dave stared at the photo. A flicker of something crossed his face. Recognition. A ghost of a smile. "Rusted Complaint," he mumbled. "Man, we were awful." "Yes," Frank said, his voice rising with excitement. "We were. Remember the feedback?" Mrs. Henderson in the front row plugged her ears. Sarah stepped up beside him and uncapped a small vial. She waved it under Dave's nose. The scent of cheap beer and motor oil filled the air. "Your dad's garage," she said. "Where you used to practice." Dave's face was a war zone of emotions. Confusion, memory, a dawning horror. His hands began to tremble. He dropped the box of screws, the sound echoing loudly in the silent store. What's happening?" he stuttered. "I feel like I've been asleep for days." "You have been, buddy," Frank said, his eyes stinging with tears. "We are waking you up." He reached for the cassette player. He was about to press play on their terrible, glorious noise. But then something went wrong. Dave's head snapped to the side as if pulled by a string. A low groan escaped his lips, a sound of immense pressure. The placid smile tried to reassert itself on his face, but it was a twisted, broken thing. It didn't fit right. "They're fighting back," Sarah hissed, backing away. "They're trying to pull him back in, but our interference, it's scrambling the signal." Dave's body began to twitch. His limbs moved at odd, unnatural angles. The air around him grew cold, a deep, cellar-like chill that had nothing to do with the night air. He looked at Frank, but his eyes were changing. The pupils were dilating, swallowing the irises, turning his eyes into black, empty pits. The smile on his face stretched wider and wider, past the boundaries of muscle and skin. It was a smile of pure, cosmic madness. "The connection," Sarah stammered, her voice tight with terror. "We didn't just break it. We broke him. We opened the door, but we didn't know what was on the other side." Dave let out a scream. It wasn't a human scream. It was a chorus of sounds, grinding metal. Static, a high-pitched shriek that vibrated in Frank's bones. The flashlight flickered and died. In the returning dark, Dave's form seemed to lose its cohesion. He looked taller, thinner. The shadows in the room clung to him, bending and warping, as if he were a source of immense gravity. Frank could no longer see a man he knew. He was seeing a hole in the shape of a man. A tear in the fabric of the world, full of sharp edges and screaming silence. They hadn't woken their friend. They had broken the shell and let in the hungry void that was waiting outside. Panic seized Frank. A cold, sharp-toothed thing that sank its jaws into his spine. He scrambled backward, tripping over a discarded paint can and landing hard on the concrete floor. The air crackled with a strange energy, like the moments before a lightning strike. The thing that had been Dave Miller took a step forward, its joints popping like firecrackers. Its form was unstable, shifting between the familiar shape of a man and something else, something jagged and impossible, sketched in lines of shadow and wrongness. Sarah grabbed Frank's arm, her grip like iron. "Run!" she yelled, her voice cutting through his terror. She pulled him to his feet and they bolted for the back door, not daring to look behind them. The scream followed them, a sound that twisted the air and made their ears pop. It wasn't a sound of anger or pain. It was a sound of arrival. They burst out into the cool night air and ran, not stopping until the hardware store was a distant dark shape behind them. They collapsed behind a dumpster in an alleyway, gasping for breath, their lungs burning. The scream had stopped, but the silence that replaced it was somehow worse. It was a heavy, listening silence. "What was that?" Frank choked out, his whole body shaking. "What did we do?" Sarah was pale in the moonlight, her eyes wide with a horror that mirrored his own. "The conductors. They built a cage," she said, her voice a ragged whisper. "They put everyone's mind in a nice, neat cage. They thought they were in control, but they didn't realize the cage was built in the middle of a much, much larger jungle, with much bigger predators." Frank tried to process her words. His mind felt slow, thick with fear. "So, this thing, it's not them. It's not the conductors." "No," Sarah said, shaking her head. "The conductors are organized. They're about control, order. That thing in there was chaos. Pure, screaming chaos. When we tried to pull Dave out of their network, we didn't disconnect him. We made his mind loud. We turned him from a quiet, controlled radio station into a blast of static. and that static attracted something. Something that was always listening, just beyond the quiet. The truth of it settled on Frank with the weight of a tombstone. They hadn't been fighting a war with two sides, them against the conductors. They had been two small noises in a quiet room, and in their struggle they had knocked over a lamp and woken up the monster sleeping in the corner. The conductors wanted to enslave humanity's minds. They wanted to smooth them over, to make them predictable and peaceful. In doing so, they had inadvertently created the perfect bait. A human mind with all its messy emotions, its contradictions, its art and its madness, was a noisy, chaotic thing. It was a defense. The harmony signal had silenced that noise. It had turned the vibrant, unpredictable landscape of the human psyche into a flat, featureless plain, a perfect, empty stage for something else to walk onto. "It's a cosmic horror," Frank whispered, the words tasting like ash. He'd read about it in books, in the weird tales of Lovecraft and his followers. The idea that humanity was an insignificant speck in a vast, uncaring universe filled with beings so alien and powerful that their very existence could shatter the human mind. He'd always thought of it as a fun, spooky concept for a story. He never imagined it could be real. "We have to warn someone," Frank said, a new, more profound desperation taking hold. Sarah gave a short, harsh laugh that held no humor. "Warn who, Frank? The puppets or the puppeteers? Who do you think will be more horrified to learn that their perfectly ordered dollhouse is about to be devoured by something from the attic?" A flicker of movement at the end of the alley caught Frank's eye. A harmonized woman was walking her dog, or rather, she was holding a leash, and the dog was walking her. The dog strained forward, sniffing at a bush, and the woman glided along behind it, her feet barely seeming to touch the ground, her face a mask of empty peace. But then her head turned, and she looked directly down the alley at them. The smile was still there, but it didn't belong to the woman anymore. It was a knowing, predatory smile. And in the reflection of her dark, placid eyes, Frank saw a universe of screaming static. The thing that had woken up in Dave Miller wasn't just in the hardware store anymore. It was leaking out. It was finding the other empty rooms, and it was starting to make itself at home. The days that followed were a descent into a new kind of madness. The placid, orderly ballet of Harmony Creek began to break down. The change was subtle at first. The harmonized townsfolk still smiled their empty smiles, but their actions became strange. They were no longer just performing their old routines. They were performing new ones. Frank, watching from the window of Sarah's secluded cabin through a pair of powerful binoculars, saw a group of about 20 people gathered in the town square. They stood in a perfect circle, their heads tilted up at the sky, their mouths slightly open. They stood like that for hours, unmoving, like bizarre human sundials. The next day he saw dozens of people walking to the edge of Miller's Pond and solemnly throwing one shoe into the water. They would then turn and walk away, leaving a single shoe on, their gait now lopsided and odd. The conductors were losing control. Their simple, elegant program of peace and order was being corrupted. The new master of the network wasn't interested in productivity or calm. It was interested in something else. Something Frank's mind couldn't and didn't want to comprehend. It was like watching a beautiful piece of classical music being slowly overwritten by a symphony of shrieking, atonal noise. Reality itself started to fray at the edges. Sarah, who was more attuned to the natural world, noticed it first. "The birds are gone," she said one morning, her face grim. It was true. The sky was silent. The trees were empty. Then she pointed to her small garden. The rows of carrots and beans were still there, but the colors were wrong. The green of the leaves was too vibrant, almost glowing. The orange of a single carrot peeking from the soil was so intense, it hurt to look at. Physics became a suggestion, not a law. Frank watched a leaf fall from a tree, but instead of fluttering down, it fell sideways, as if gravity had shifted its direction by 90 degrees. Shadows stretched and moved when nothing was there to cast them. Sometimes, at the edge of his vision, he'd see the world ripple, like a reflection in disturbed water. The thing they had woken, the glitch in the void, as Sarah called it, wasn't just a presence in the mind. It was a presence in the world. And its very existence was a contagion that warped the laws of nature. It didn't understand physics or biology or color. It was rewriting the source code of their reality with its own insane language. The worst part was the sound. The hum of the harmony signal was still there, but it was now threaded with other noises. A faint, high-pitched whining, a wet tearing sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. And a whisper, a constant, sibilant whisper that coiled at the edge of hearing, almost forming words, but never quite managing it. The whispers promised secret truths about the shape of the universe. But Frank knew that to truly hear and understand those words would be to lose his mind completely. He and Sarah were trapped. To go into town meant risking being overwhelmed by the warping reality and the chorus of whispers. To stay in the cabin felt like waiting in a closet while the house burned down around them. Sleep offered no escape. Frank's dreams were filled with impossible geometry, with cities built from screaming flesh, and with a vast, unblinking eye made of static, staring at him from a black sky. One night, the power in the distant town went out, all of it. The faint glow on the horizon vanished, plunging everything into a profound darkness. A few minutes later, the lights came back on. But they weren't the normal warm yellow streetlights. Every light in Harmony Creek, every porch light, every street light, every window, was now glowing with a sickening violet light. And they were all pulsing. A slow, steady, synchronized pulse, like a giant, alien heart beating in the darkness. "It's not just a network of minds anymore," Sarah said, her voice trembling as she stared at the pulsing purple glow. "It's a single mind now, a single organism, and it's waking up." Frank felt her primal, gut-wrenching terror. They hadn't just woken a monster. They had midwifed the birth of a god of chaos and madness, and Harmony Creek was its cradle. The communication came 2 nights after the purple pulse began. It wasn't a voice in their heads, not exactly. It was a feeling. A sudden intrusive presence that was cold, logical, and utterly alien. It was a feeling of pure, desperate order in the middle of the encroaching chaos. It was the conductors. Frank and Sarah were sitting in the cabin, the silence between them thick with unspoken fear, when they both flinched. The air grew heavy, and a wave of concentrated thought washed over them. It was not a whisper from the void. It was a clear, sharp signal, like a single, pure note in a hurricane of noise. "You are the Esteste. You are the anomaly who must communicate." The voice was genderless, emotionless. It felt like reading a technical manual. It was directed at them, 2 points of resistance in a sea of corrupted data. "They're talking to us," Frank breathed, his hands clenching into fists. "We did not anticipate this," the thought stream continued, laced with something that wasn't quite panic, but a kind of high-level systemic error report. The Chauselik output a probability. A 0.anoma briosect to psi chifi vasuums. A psychic vacuum, Sarah said aloud, her voice defiant. You mean what you did to everyone? You flattened their minds and rolled out a welcome mat for this thing. Your species is tarty, violent, self-destructive. A cacophony of emotional noise was sought to impose order, to bring harmony. It was the ultimate cosmic condescension. They saw humanity as a messy, screaming child that needed to be put to bed. Frank felt a surge of anger. You had no right. You took away everything that makes us human. That which makes you human is a flaw in your design. A bigs that leads to your own extinction. Why offered a permanent stables? The conductor's logic was flawless and utterly terrifying. They were celestial surgeons who had decided the only cure for humanity's messy soul was to remove it entirely. But your interference with the subject designated Dave Miller created an unstable resonance, a shout in the silence. It drew the attention of the glitch. The entity has no name we can speak. It is the flaw in reality's structure. It consumes patterns. It devours order. It has begun to overwrite our network. It is using the neural pathways we established as inroads to your physical plane. Frank and Sarah looked at each other, the horrifying scale of their mistake laid bare. They had thought they were poking a beehive. They had actually cracked the containment shield on a nuclear reactor. The conductor's next thought was heavy with a cold, calculated desperation. The FE's expansion is accelerating. It will consume this Ines. Then it will consume you. Wes, our own network is now a bridge for our enemy. We cannot sever the connection without destroying the host minds. A catastrophic system. Failure. So there it was. The great, powerful conductors were trapped. They couldn't just pack up and leave. Their system was so deeply integrated with humanity's consciousness that they were now bound to Earth's fate. They were shackled to the very minds they had sought to enslave. Require your assistance. The thought was a bitter pill for them to swallow. Frank could feel the cold logic warring with the necessity of the request. You are immune to the harmony cycle, but you are also immune to the Afton Psi Correp. You are Inek and Vaphatis. You connect in ways we cannot. What do you want from us? Sarah asked, her arms crossed, her face a mask of stone. Selpa restore the harmony. The thought stream was precise. We will give you the means to amplify the signal from a central point. A bicep strong enough to rebreb control. It will push the Epshid back into the void. It will solidify the network. Permanently. The offer settled in the room, colder and heavier than any winter night. The conductors were panicked. They were offering Frank and Sarah a deal with the devil to save themselves from a demon. They were being asked to become the willing architects of humanity's eternal, peaceful, thoughtless damnation. The choice laid before them was a monster with two heads. On one side was the quiet, dreamless sleep of the harmony. A world of smiling, empty shells, their souls locked away forever, but safe. A placid, eternal twilight for the human race. On the other side was the screaming, kaleidoscopic madness of the glitch. A universe where physics was a dying suggestion and reality was being rewritten by a cosmic lunatic. A quick, spectacular, and utter end to everything. Annihilation by tranquility, or annihilation by chaos. No, Sarah said immediately, her voice a low growl. Absolutely not. I'd rather be eaten by a god of chaos than live as a pet in a cage. Frank wasn't so sure. He thought of the thing that had been Dave Miller. He thought of the pulsing purple lights over the town, of the whispers that promised insanity. The harmony, as terrible as it was at least quiet. It was an end to fear. A part of him, a tired, terrified part, screamed to take the deal. Just make it all stop. We decked your hesitation. The cold thought of the conductors seeped back into his mind. The choice is logical. Minikolos. The ating guarantee state or destruction. Our sim guarantees survival. The essence of your species will be preserved, if not its individuality. Its essence, Frank shot back, finding a spark of his own anger. Our individuality is our essence. The mess is the point. The love, the hate, the stupid songs, the bad art, the hope, the fear. You don't want to preserve us. You want to hollow us out and wear our skin. The conductors did not reply. They simply presented the next piece of information in his mind. A map. A detailed mental schematic of Harmony Creek, with a bright pulsing light at its center. The new Harmony Net Central Broadcast Tower, located on a hill just outside of town. It was the heart of their network. The continuos are there. The information was a simple offering. We cannot approach it harpenom. Signatures are too close to the atoms. We would be consumed. Yo. The estate say, California and pass through the noise. We will grant you access to the core system. You can amplify our Senkyu. The choice remains yours. The presence receded, leaving Frank and Sarah alone in the cabin with the impossible decision. It's a lie, Frank, Sarah insisted, her eyes boring into him. You can't trust them. They're slavers trying to trick us into locking our own chains. And what's your plan, Sarah? Frank retorted, his voice strained. We just sit here and wait for reality to turn inside out. We let that glitch win. At least the conductors are a devil we know. We don't fight a devil by making a deal with another one, she said, slamming her hand on the table. There has to be another way. A third option. Frank sank into a chair, running his hands through his hair. A third option. It sounded nice. It sounded like something a hero in a book would find. But this wasn't a book. This was real. He looked around the cabin at the books, the tools, the evidence of a life, lived with purpose and independence. Sarah was right. To choose the harmony was to betray everything that made life worth living. It was choosing to live as a well-cared-for houseplant. But to choose the glitch was to choose a screaming, agonizing death for everyone on the planet. His eyes fell on the battery-powered cassette player they had brought to the hardware store. The cassette was still inside. Rusted complaint. Their terrible, noisy, chaotic attempt at making music. It was pure, unfiltered human expression. It was messy. It was flawed. It was loud. An idea began to form in his mind. It was a wild, desperate, and probably suicidal idea. The conductors had said the glitch was attracted to a psychic vacuum. The harmony signal created that vacuum by silencing the chaotic noise of the human mind. Frank and Sarah were static, anomalies, because their minds were still noisy. What if they're both wrong? Frank said slowly, looking at Sarah. The conductors think the solution is more order, more silence. But what if the solution isn't silence? What if it's more noise? Sarah stared at him, her expression shifting from anger to confusion, then to a dawning horrified understanding. "You're not thinking of amplifying their signal," she whispered. "No," Frank said, a strange, terrifying calm settling over him. He stood up and looked towards the distant hill where the broadcast tower stood, a needle piercing the bruised purple sky. "I'm thinking we give the glitch something to listen to. We're going to turn the volume up. All the way up. We're going to show it what a real human mind sounds like." They were going to fight a hurricane with a symphony, or maybe just a scream. The broadcast tower on the hill was a skeletal finger pointing at a sick sky. The air around it was thick and heavy, vibrating with the silent war being waged between the harmony signal and the encroaching chaos of the glitch. As Frank and Sarah got closer, the whispers grew louder, coiling in their ears, promising them the universe if they would just listen. They had to shout to each other to be heard over the psychic noise. The tower's control room was a small, sterile dome at its base. The door slid open as they approached, a silent invitation from the desperate conductors. Inside, the room was a circle of glowing screens and panels, all displaying a terrifyingly complex schematic of the harmony network. In the center of the room was a single console with a large glowing receptacle waiting for them. "You have arrived," the conductor's thought was faint, strained. The FD's influence is as strong. "Ear, proceed. Quickly. Instib the empathing key. We will guard you." A panel on the console slid open, revealing a slot perfectly shaped to receive a human hand. The key wasn't a device, it was a person. A living, independent mind. Sarah looked at Frank, her face pale but resolute. "Noise," she said, her voice a firm anchor in the swirling madness. "Not their quiet, our noise." Frank nodded. He knew what he had to do. He ignored the open panel. This wasn't about amplifying the conductor's signal. This was about hijacking their system. It was about creating a new broadcast. A broadcast of pure, unfiltered humanity. He looked at the main interface, a vast screen showing the flow of psychic energy. It was a river of quiet, orderly, purple light. But it was being corrupted, eaten at the edges by tendrils of shrieking, multicolored static. The glitch. Frank's plan was insane. He wasn't going to reinforce the dam of the harmony signal. He was going to blow it up and flood the valley with a different kind of water. "I need everything," Frank said to Sarah, his voice strained with concentration as he began to manipulate the strange intuitive controls. "Every memory, every feeling. Don't hold back." "What are you doing?" Sarah asked. "The conductors use this tower to send a single, simple signal of peace," Frank explained, his fingers flying across the console. "It's a powerful transmitter, but it's only broadcasting on one frequency. I'm trying to open all the channels. All of them." He bypassed the conductor's core programming, rerouting the energy flow. He wasn't a computer expert, but the system was psychic. It responded to intent, and his intent was a roaring fire of defiance. He wasn't thinking about code. He was thinking about the smell of old books, the taste of bad coffee, the sting of a scraped knee, the joy of a perfectly told joke, the agony of loss. He reached out with his mind not just to Sarah, but beyond. He thought of Dave Miller, of Mrs. Gable, of the little boy with the red ball. He pulled on the faint, buried echoes of who they were. He grabbed the chaos of rusted complaint, the fury of a lover's argument, the quiet desperation of a lonely night, the soaring hope of a first kiss. He gathered every jagged, beautiful, terrible piece of the human experience he could find in his own mind and in the ghost memory of the town. "Stistit is encroaching," This is not the correct proxy. You are destabilizing the network. The conductor's thought was a shriek of logical fury. "You're damn right I am," Frank muttered. He poured it all into the console. The love, the hate, the art, the war, the birth, the death, the poetry, the profanity, the prayers, the blasphemy. He took the entire, messy, glorious, horrific cacophony of the human soul and crammed it into the broadcast system. For a moment, nothing happened. The screens flickered. The whispers from the glitch grew louder, more insistent, drawn to this new, incredible spike of psychic energy. Then the tower hummed, not with the gentle thrum of the harmony, but with a deep, resonant, gut-shaking groan. The purple light on the screens wavered, then shattered, replaced by a blinding, coruscating rainbow of every color imaginable. From the top of the tower, a wave of pure psychic energy erupted. It wasn't a signal, it was a roar. The roar of 1 billion souls screaming, laughing, crying, and singing at once. Across Harmony Creek, every harmonized person stopped. Their placid smiles vanished, their heads snapped up, and they screamed. But it wasn't the single unified scream of the thing in the hardware store. It was thousands of individual screams. Screams of terror, of confusion, of rage, of sudden shocking self-awareness. The puppets were waking up, not to peace but to the full, agonizing, chaotic reality of what had been done to them. The sky above the tower cracked, not like thunder, but like glass. A fine, dark line appeared in the fabric of the heavens, then another, and another, spreading out in a web of pure blackness. The glitch, the great cosmic entity, had been drawn by the silence, but it was being driven mad by the noise. The sheer, overwhelming, contradictory broadcast of human consciousness was something it could not process, could not consume. It was poison, it was pain. Frank and Sarah stood in the control room, watching the world break. They had not saved humanity. They had not doomed it. They had unleashed it. They had traded the certainty of a quiet cage for the terrifying unknown freedom of the storm. The choice was made. The silence was broken. And the true, chaotic, horrifying and beautiful song of humanity was being broadcast to the uncaring, listening stars for the very first time. They didn't know if they would survive the next minute. But for the first time in a long time, they were truly, terribly alive.